Renee and Carl started at the same call center on the same Monday 9 years ago. Same training class, same starting wage, $14 an hour. Carl makes more now, actually, after a promotion Renee never got. Renee has $31,000 sitting quietly across two accounts. Carl has $312 in checking and a car payment that is 4 days late. This is not a story about who worked harder. Carl works harder, honestly. He picks up overtime almost every week. Renee leaves at 5 on the dot. If income and effort explained wealth, Carl would be the one with $31,000, not the one 4 days behind on a Honda. There's one habit that explains almost the entire gap, and it has nothing to do with a side hustle, a stock tip, or some secret budgeting app. Stay with this, because by the end, you'll know exactly whether you already have this habit or not. There's also a specific thing Carl says years later in a break room that tells you exactly why he never noticed the gap forming. We'll get there. Nobody sits you down and teaches this in school, and if your family was living paycheck to paycheck, nobody taught it at home either, because you cannot teach a habit you never had the room to practice yourself. Most people learn about money by watching what their parents did under pressure, not what they did on a calm Tuesday, and pressure rarely produces habits worth copying. Here is the habit, named plainly. The moment Renee's paycheck lands, before she opens a single bill, before she checks what's due, $60 moves automatically into a savings account she cannot see from her main banking app without logging into a separate site. She set this up 9 years ago on her second week of employment, and she has never once turned it off, not during a layoff scare, not during a bad breakup, not even the month her car needed a new transmission. Carl's paycheck lands in one account, all of it, visible, spendable, waiting. He intends to save what's left over at the end of the month. There's almost never anything left over at the end of the month because money that is visible and available gets spent, slowly and reasonably, on things that each individually make sense. If you started behind or in debt, or with absolutely nothing in savings, right now this is the part that matters most to you. The habit does not require $31,000 to start. It requires exactly the size of the gap between what you earn and what you can survive on, even if that gap is $9 a week. Renee started with $11 a week. The amount grew as her wage grew. The habit came first. You do not need to be debt-free to start this. You do not need $31,000 or even $300 sitting anywhere. You need one number small enough that you genuinely will not notice it's gone, moved automatically on the same day every single time you get paid, starting exactly from wherever you are standing right now, debt and all. Here is the part nobody explains well. Removing money before you see it changes your relationship to it completely. Carl looks at his full paycheck and mentally spends all of it, adjusting downward when bills come due. Renee looks at a paycheck that is already smaller than what she earned, and mentally spends only what's left, adjusting upward almost never. Same income. Two completely different starting points for every decision that follows. This isn't about Carl being weak or Renee being strong. Put Renee's full, unreduced paycheck in front of her every week for 9 years, and she would likely have spent it exactly the way Carl does. The habit isn't a personality trait. It's a structure, built once, that removes the need for willpower on all the weeks that would otherwise test it. You have felt Carl's version of this before. The visible number that quietly gives you permission to spend a little more than you meant to, because it's right there, available, technically yours. That permission is not a character flaw. It's what visible money does to a normal brain every single time. Visible money gets spent. Hidden money grows. That's the entire mechanism. Renee tried this exact automatic transfer once, and it failed within 3 weeks, back when she was 22, because the amount she picked was too aggressive and she kept overdrafting and turning it back off in frustration. There's a specific number involved in why it failed the first time, and it matters more than it sounds like it should. Hold on to that. This is the part that decides whether the habit survives long term. The amount has to be small enough to be genuinely boring, not so large that it forces a crisis every 2 weeks, small enough to forget about. That's the whole secret. Here's the number that broke it the first time. At 22, Renee tried moving $40 a week, nearly a quarter of what she had left after rent. She overdrafted twice in a month and turned the whole thing off in frustration, convinced automatic savings simply didn't work for people like her. It wasn't the idea that failed, it was the size of the number attached to it. By year 2, $60 a week had become $280 a month, sitting untouched, growing into roughly $6,000, including 2 modest raises. She redirected the same day they landed, before she got used to spending them. Carl got the same 2 raises. Both went into checking, both got absorbed within a month into slightly nicer takeout, a slightly better phone plan, small reasonable upgrades that never individually looked like a mistake and never individually got questioned. Here is the mirror moment. You have gotten a raise before and felt your spending quietly expand to match it within about 6 weeks, without ever making a single conscious decision to spend more. That is not weakness. That is exactly what happens to money you can see and access freely. It expands to fill whatever space it's given, almost every single time for almost every single person. At year 5, something happened that revealed the whole gap at once. Both of their cars needed transmissions the same month, a genuine coincidence. Both repairs landing around $1,800. Renee paid hers from savings, felt a small pinch, and moved on with her week. Carl put his on a store credit card at 26% interest, and 11 months later he was still paying it off, plus $60 total in interest, on a repair that should have simply cost $1,800 once. Renee mentioned the repair to Carl in the break room, mostly as small talk, the way you'd mention any errand. Carl laughed and said must be nice and meant it as a joke, not knowing that must be nice was doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, covering for a gap that had been building quietly for 5 years before either of them noticed it out loud. That's the moment I mentioned earlier. Carl never noticed the gap forming because it never looked like a decision on any single day. It looked like a joke in a break room, said lightly, about a stroke of luck that was never luck at all. That $1,800 repair cost Carl roughly $2,030 by the time the interest finished compounding against him. It cost Renee exactly $1,800 and one uncomfortable week of watching a number go down. This is the actual mechanism behind almost every gap like this one. It is rarely one big financial decision. It is the presence or absence of a small, boring, automatic removal of money before temptation ever gets a vote. Renee will probably retire with real security, not because she is smarter than Carl or more disciplined in the way people usually mean that word. Because 9 years ago, in her second week at a job paying $14 an hour, she set up a transfer for $11 and forgot about it, and the habit did the rest of the work without needing her willpower ever again. No willpower required. Just one decision made once. Renee's daughter is 7 now and already has a piggy bank with 2 compartments, one she can see and spend from, one she cannot open without asking. Renee didn't read a parenting book about this. She just built the only system she actually trusts at a smaller scale for someone she's raising. Nobody at that call center knows any of this. Nobody saw the $11 9 years ago, or the failed attempt at 22 that came before it, or the $1,800 week that barely registered because a boring habit had already done its job years in advance. Which is exactly why it worked. What Renee actually built in those 9 years was never really about the $31,000. It was the specific quiet of not flinching when something breaks. It was being able to say must be nice back to Carl in her head and mean something closer to earned than lucky. It was sleeping through the night the week the transmission failed instead of doing the math on a ceiling at 2 in the morning. Nobody claps for $11 a week. Nobody ever will. That was always the whole point of building it that way. If this made you think about the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep, subscribe. Next time, we look at the exact month most people undo a habit like this one, and what it costs them when they do.